At my retirement party, my wife served me divorce papers while my own daughter cheered. I just smiled, signed everything, and whispered to her, "You have no idea what you just did to yourself." Her face went pale as she realized. The room went quiet. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on me, but I didn't look up. I kept my eyes focused on the papers in front of me. The sharp edges of the manila folder felt cold in my hands. The smell of cake and coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of the office. The sound of clinking plates and idle chatter from the party guests had abruptly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. There I was, standing in the break room of Kellerman Printing, after 30 years of hard work, signing away the last shred of what had once been my marriage. It should have been a moment of celebration. My retirement. 30 years spent grinding away, working long hours, and putting up with deadlines that seemed to have no end. A room full of my coworkers, all gathered to see me off. It should have been a warm, heartfelt goodbye. But instead, it had turned into a public execution of everything I thought I knew about my family. Grace, my wife of 19 years, walked in, wearing that expensive black dress she only pulled out for occasions like this. In her hand was a folder. She didn't even glance at anyone else. She went straight to me, stopping a few feet away and holding the folder up to me. Divorce papers. Loud enough for the entire room to hear. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a statement, and she made it clear this was the end. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the words on each one. The petition for dissolution was already signed by her. It was dated 3 days ago. Property division, spousal support, all laid out as if she had been planning this for months. I didn't even have to read it all. I knew enough. I found the signature line, picked up the pen from her outstretched hand, and signed without hesitation. "Do you have a pen?" she asked, her voice steady. I didn't answer, just handed it back to her. "Here you go," I said, my voice as calm as it could be. Then I leaned in close, almost whispering. "You have no idea what you just did to yourself." I don't know if she heard me. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. She didn't respond. She just turned around and walked out of the room, her high heels clicking on the floor, loud and deliberate. Tiffany, my daughter, followed behind her without a word. No look in my direction. No glance of remorse or guilt. Just silence. But as Grace walked out, Tiffany stood near the door clapping. Slow at first, as though she were applauding some grand victory. Her mother's victory, I suppose. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by Nolan, my friend from the binder line, clearing his throat. "Man, that was just cold," he muttered, probably trying to make sense of it all. I didn't blame him. It was cold. I had no idea how I felt about it yet. "Yeah," I said, turning back to him like nothing had happened. "You were saying something about the carburetor." The conversations around us picked back up, awkward at first, but they slowly resumed. Some of the guys gave me sideways glances, others didn't know what to say, so they didn't say anything at all. I stayed for the rest of the party, ate the cake, and accepted the plaque they gave me. The one with my name on it, my reward for 30 years of loyalty to the company. 30 years, now all wrapped up in this moment. When I left around 8:30, the house was empty. Grace had already taken what she wanted. Her grandmother's china, the coffee maker, half the bathroom supplies. The furniture was still there. Too heavy for her to move without help, I guess. She took what she could. But the house, the one I had bought with my inheritance, stayed behind. I sat down on the couch in the living room and stared at the room. The bookshelf I had built. The rug we bought from some outlet mall in Pennsylvania. The TV I picked out after working overtime for months to save up for it. All of it seemed so insignificant now. Grace had taken what she wanted, and now it was just me. Alone in this house that no longer felt like home. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Neil. "Maria's freaking out." Said that was brutal. "You good?" I typed back, "I'm great. Talk tomorrow." I set my phone down, and for the first time, I allowed myself to just sit there, in the silence. And in that silence I realized something. I was free. The house was the kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones, making every creak of the floorboards feel like an intrusion. I sat there in the living room, my eyes drifting from one piece of furniture to another. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where a life had been lived, and now, it was just empty. Grace had taken what she wanted. The things she could carry. The things that mattered to her. The china, the coffee maker, a few trinkets here and there. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She didn't take the furniture. I suppose it was too heavy for her to move on her own. I wasn't surprised. She'd never cared much for the physical stuff. She cared about the money. She'd always cared about the money. I leaned back on the couch and let the silence fill the space around me. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all. The weight of everything she had taken from me. The weight of everything I thought I had. I had spent so many years working to build something, to provide a life for my family. 30 years at Kellerman Printing, 30 years of sacrifice. And now, all of it had been wiped away in an instant. I could hear my phone buzzing in the other room. I ignored it at first. I didn't want to talk to anyone. Not right then. But after a minute, the buzzing stopped and then started again. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to check it. It was a text from Neil. "Maria's freaking out. Said that was brutal. You good?" I stared at the message for a moment, my finger hovering over the keys. I wasn't good, but what was I supposed to say? How do you respond to something like this? How do you explain to someone that your wife of 19 years has just served you divorce papers at your retirement party, in front of everyone, and your daughter has clapped in support of it? I typed back, "I'm great. Talk tomorrow." I didn't know what else to say. I set my phone down and sat back at the kitchen table. I tried to take in the reality of the situation, but it was hard to focus. I kept hearing the sound of Tiffany's clapping in my head. The way she had cheered for her mother, I had been expecting it. In some ways I had been preparing for it. But hearing it, seeing her do it in front of everyone, made it feel real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. I didn't know how to feel. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout and demand answers. But I couldn't. I felt numb. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had been living in this numb state for a while. Grace and I had been drifting apart for years. I had always told myself I was too busy, too focused on work. But the truth was, I had been shutting myself off from her. I hadn't wanted to face what was happening in our marriage. Now here I was, alone, in a house that was supposed to be filled with the memories of our life together. But there were no memories left. Just the silence. I walked back into the living room and picked up the plaque they had given me at the party. 30 years at Kellerman Printing. 30 years of hard work. I could still feel the weight of it in my hand. But it didn't feel like an accomplishment anymore. It just felt like a symbol of everything I had lost. I sat down on the couch again, holding the plaque in my hands. I stared at the wall across from me, but I wasn't really seeing it. I was just thinking about how much had changed in the last few hours. How my life had completely shifted. My phone buzzed again. It was a call from Martin, my lawyer. I hesitated before answering. I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone, but I knew I had to. This wasn't just about Grace anymore. This was about protecting myself. "Rick," Martin's voice was steady on the other end. "I just got the divorce papers you sent over. I've gone through them. We need to talk strategy." I exhaled slowly and leaned back against the couch. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk strategy, Martin. I understand. But you have to be. Grace isn't playing by the rules, and we need to get ahead of this. She's trying to take everything. But we're going to make sure that doesn't happen." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. I had always thought the divorce would be a simple matter. We'd split the house, divide the savings, and go our separate ways. But Grace had different plans. She had planned this, and I hadn't seen it coming. "I'll be in touch tomorrow, Rick," Martin continued. "We'll get everything sorted." "Thanks, Martin." I hung up the phone and set it down on the table. For a moment I just sat there staring at the wall again. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how this would play out, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let Grace take everything from me. Not this time. I had worked too hard for too long to let her walk away with it all. I stood up, my eyes scanning the empty house. The silence was deafening, but it was also my new reality. It wasn't just Grace who had walked away from this marriage. I had walked away from it too. And now, I had to figure out what came next. I didn't have all the answers, but, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of something. The days after the party were a blur. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a strange unsettling calm. I moved through the motions, going to the bank, meeting with my lawyer, checking my accounts, making sure everything was in order. But the house felt different now. The emptiness echoed in every corner. Grace was gone, and so was the life I thought I had built. But then came the unexpected. I met Jessica at the coffee shop near my lawyer's office. She had been in the HR department at Kellerman Printing, the company where I'd spent most of my adult life. I'd never really paid much attention to her before. She was just another face in the crowd. But when she reached out after the divorce papers were served, I realized she was more than just a coworker. She had been quietly watching from the sidelines, and now, she was offering her support. We sat at a small corner table, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The light from the windows cast long shadows on the walls as we spoke, the hum of conversation from other customers surrounding us. "You're handling this better than I would have expected," she said, her voice calm. But there was something about the way she looked at me that made me feel like she was seeing more than just the surface. I shrugged. trying to downplay the emotions that had been running wild inside of me. It's not like I had much of a choice. I just signed the papers and moved on. Jessica gave me a knowing look. It's not that simple. You've been through a lot. You don't have to pretend like it's all under control. I stared down at the coffee cup in front of me, the steam rising in slow swirls. There was something in her voice that made me pause. I had spent so many years keeping everything inside, shutting out anyone who might get too close. And yet, here she was, offering an opening. I wasn't sure if I was ready to take it. You're right, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. It's not that simple. But what choice do I have? She's gone. Tiffany's. Well, Tiffany. And now I'm just trying to keep my head above water. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her eyes softening. I get it, but you don't have to go through this alone. I looked up, meeting her gaze. There was something genuine in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. It made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone in this. I don't know how to do this. I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She smiled, a small, understanding smile. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just take it one step at a time, one day at a time. I nodded, not sure if I believed her, but feeling a little lighter nonetheless. The conversation shifted, and we talked about work, about the future, about things that didn't seem quite so heavy. But the moment had been a turning point. I realized that maybe I didn't have to face everything alone. When I left the coffee shop, I felt a little less like I was walking through life on autopilot. Jessica had given me something I hadn't known I needed, a reminder that there were people in the world who cared, that I didn't have to shut everyone out. But there was still a long road ahead. Grace's departure had left scars that couldn't be ignored, and Tiffany's coldness still stung like a fresh wound. I wasn't sure what to do with any of it, but at least I was starting to think about it. The next day, I met with Martin, my lawyer. He had been helping me navigate the mess that Grace had left behind, but the weight of the situation was still heavy. She's going to fight for the house, Martin said, flipping through the divorce papers again. She's already making claims about spousal support, and she wants half of everything, including your pension. I let out a deep breath, trying to steady myself. She thinks she's entitled to it all, doesn't she? Martin nodded, his face serious. She's gonna try, but we have the upper hand. You've got your documentation in order, and we're gonna make sure she doesn't get away with taking more than what she's legally entitled to. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing the back of my neck. I just want to get this over with. I don't want to fight anymore. You don't have to fight, Rick. We're just gonna make sure the law does its job. I nodded again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just the legalities. The emotions were tangled in ways that a lawyer's words couldn't untangle. As I left Martin's office, the weight of everything settled back on my shoulders. Grace wasn't going to go down without a fight, and I knew that. But I also knew that I wasn't going to back down this time. I had spent too many years hiding from the truth, from my own emotions. Now I had to face it all, no matter how painful. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to learn how. The days stretched on, each one feeling more surreal than the last. The numbness I had initially felt after Grace's departure began to fade, replaced by a gnawing sense of anger and betrayal. Every time I walked through the house, I was reminded of what had been taken from me. Not just the things Grace had packed up, but the years of my life that felt like they had been wasted. I tried to focus on the things I could control. The house was mine, and I was determined to keep it that way. Grace had made her claim, trying to make me out as the villain who hid assets and withheld information. But I knew the truth. I had done everything by the book, by the law. The house, the savings, everything. I had kept the paperwork. I had kept track of it all. I wasn't going to let her take what I had worked for. But then came the discovery. It wasn't until I was sorting through some old boxes in the garage that I found it. A small silver box hidden under a stack of old newspapers. I had almost overlooked it, but something made me pull it out. Inside were a few old receipts, a couple of keepsakes, and a stack of printed text messages. My stomach dropped as I flipped through them. They were from Grace. And they weren't just any old messages. They were from Alan, the man she had been seeing behind my back. I sat down on the floor of the garage, the weight of it all settling in. The messages were filled with plans for the future, for a life without me. Alan had been the one Grace had been talking about, the one she had been so desperate to leave me for. I couldn't bring myself to read all of them, but one message stood out. Once the house sells and I get my half plus support, we're looking at close to $80,000 to start with. We can go anywhere, start fresh. The words burned in my chest. I had suspected something, but seeing it all laid out in black and white hit harder than I ever expected. Grace hadn't just been planning a divorce. She had been planning a whole new life with him, using everything I had worked for to fund it. I put the box down and leaned back against the workbench. The air in the garage felt thick. The silence was suffocating. I couldn't believe it. I had spent years working my ass off, doing everything I could for our family, and she had been planning this all along. The house, the savings, everything I had been nothing more than a stepping stone for her escape. I knew I couldn't just ignore this. I had to act. I sent the screenshots to Martin, my lawyer. I didn't need to tell him much, he would know exactly what they meant. His response came back quickly. This changes things. We're going to use this. This will help us in court. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had the upper hand. I wasn't going to let Grace get away with this. Not after everything she had done, but as the days passed I realized something. This wasn't just about the house or the money anymore. It was about something deeper. Something that had been eating away at me for years. The lies, the deceit, the way I had let her manipulate me into thinking everything was fine. I had spent so much of my life focused on my work, on providing for her and Tiffany, that I had neglected myself. I had neglected my own happiness. I had let Grace take everything from me, emotionally, mentally, physically, and I hadn't even noticed. Now I had a choice. I could keep playing the game, letting her win in the end, or I could fight. I could fight for myself, for the life I had left. When I walked into Martin's office the next day, I was ready. Ready to face whatever came next. I had been blindsided by Grace, but I wasn't going to let that happen again. I was going to take back control. Martin didn't waste time. We went over the legal documents, the evidence I had gathered, the things Grace had overlooked. He was confident, calm, as always. But there was something in the air that felt different. We were no longer just reacting to what Grace was doing. Now we were playing offense. You've got everything you need, Martin said, flipping through the pages. It's time to respond. I sat back in the chair, the weight of it all starting to hit me again. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't just a victim. This time I was taking control. You're right, I said, my voice steady. It's time to fight back. As I left Martin's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time since Grace had left, I felt like I was in charge of my own life again. I wasn't going to let Grace get away with this. Not now. Not ever. The days were starting to blend together. I spent my mornings going through the motions: coffee, paperwork, calls with Martin about the ongoing divorce. Each day felt like a repeat of the last, but underneath the routine, something had shifted. There was a part of me that had started to grow stronger. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was taking control. The calls from Grace had stopped. At first, that made sense. She was probably figuring out what to do next, trying to work out her plans with Alan, the man who had been waiting in the wings. I couldn't blame her for wanting out. Our marriage had been falling apart for years. But what I couldn't understand, what stung the most, was how easily she had just thrown it all away. Everything we had built, everything I had sacrificed. But it wasn't just her. It was Tiffany too. One night, a few days after my meeting with Martin, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick it up. Dad. It was Tiffany. She sounded distant like she always did lately. The coldness in her voice was like a dagger in my chest. Tiffany. What's going on? I need to talk to you about Mom, she said, her voice wavering just a bit. She's staying with Paige, and it's been weird. I don't know where she's supposed to go after this. I felt a twinge of frustration, a flash of anger, but I kept it in check. This wasn't about me and Grace anymore. It was about Tiffany. What do you want me to do about it? Tiffany hesitated, and I could almost hear her biting her lip. She doesn't have enough money for an apartment. She's asking if you could help her. She's really struggling, Dad. The request hit me like a punch to the stomach. After everything, after the way Grace had served me those divorce papers at my retirement party, after the lies, the betrayal. Now Tiffany was asking me to help her. Help the woman who had left me, who had been planning this whole thing with her new boyfriend, all while pretending to be part of my family. Your mother has enough money, Tiffany, I said, trying to keep my voice even. She's already taken her share from the joint account. She's got more than enough to find somewhere to live. But she's still your wife. Tiffany fired back, her voice sharp, almost desperate. She shouldn't have to go through this alone. You can't just leave her like this. My heart ached at the words, but I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Tiffany, I said, my voice softer now but firm, your mother served me divorce papers at my retirement party. In front of everyone. She clapped when it happened. And now you want me to help her. After everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I didn't know she was going to do that. Tiffany finally said, her voice small. I didn't know it would go down like that. I closed my eyes, rubbing the bridge of my nose. I know you didn't, kid. But that's what happened. And now it's time for you to understand something. I'm not going to be the one to fix everything for her. Not this time. Are you really going to do this? Are you going to be that guy? The one who just cuts her off? I paused, taking a deep breath. No, Tiffany. I'm not cutting her off. But I'm not going to keep taking the blame for everything either. She made her choices. And now, she's going to have to live with them. We all are. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end, and for a moment, I thought she was going to hang up. But instead she just sighed a long tired exhale. I just wanted to help her. I don't know what to do. You don't have to fix it, Tiffany. You just need to stop thinking you can. Your mom has made her decisions, and now it's time for you to start making yours. There was a pause. Then, quietly, Tiffany said, "Okay, Dad, I get it." I sat back in the chair, a knot forming in my stomach. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to have these hard conversations with my daughter. But this was the reality now. The world wasn't what I thought it was, and the people I loved weren't who I thought they were either. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Neil. I knew what was coming. Mary has been texting me. Grace is telling everyone you're hiding money, trying to screw her over. She's saying you're trying to keep the house. I set the phone down for a second. I wasn't surprised. I knew Grace had been working the angles, trying to spin the narrative in her favor. But it didn't matter, it was just noise. She can say whatever she wants, I replied. But I'm not the one who's been lying here. Maria had called Neil right after the conversation with Tiffany. She was on Grace's side now, of course. It was easier to believe Grace's version of things, the story where I was the villain. But I knew better. I knew the truth. I had the receipts, literally. I thought back to the text messages I had found between Grace and Alan. How they had planned this whole thing, how they had worked together to tear apart a family. It made my blood boil just thinking about it. But I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to be the one to cave. Not this time. The silence in the house was almost comforting now, a stark contrast to the noise and the case I had been living in for so long. I had made my decision. I was done fighting for Grace. I was done fighting for a family that had already fallen apart. I wasn't going to play her game anymore. The game where she got everything, and I got nothing. It was time to take back control, to make decisions that were about me, and not about trying to please everyone else. For once, I was going to do what was best for me. And that felt good. For the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to what came next. The court date was looming, and, with it, a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Every time I thought about Grace, about the things she had done, the anger flared up inside me. But I had to keep it together. This wasn't about emotions anymore. This was about getting what was rightfully mine. The morning of the hearing arrived, and I was more focused than I'd ever been. I had everything prepared, Martin had done his part, and I had everything in order. I wasn't going to let Grace's manipulations ruin me. She thought she could walk away with everything, but she was wrong. I walked into the courtroom with Martin, the cold air of the building sending a shiver down my spine. The smell of stale paper, dust, and old books filled the air as we sat in the waiting area. The low murmur of voices echoed off the walls. I glanced around, noticing the other people waiting for their turn in front of the judge. Some looked as nervous as I felt. Others looked resigned, like they already knew how this was going to play out. Martin didn't waste time. He handed me the papers and we sat in silence for a few moments, going over everything one last time. I kept my focus on the documents, trying to block out the tension building in the pit of my stomach. "You ready?" Martin asked quietly. I nodded. "Let's get this over with." When our names were called, I stood up, following Martin into the courtroom. The room was small, the walls lined with shelves full of files and old casebooks. The judge was already seated at the front, flipping through some papers. She looked like she had seen it all, gray hair, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She didn't look like the type to be swayed by drama or emotions. Grace was sitting on the other side of the room, her lawyer, Nain, beside her. Grace had her arms crossed, her face set in that familiar, defensive expression. She didn't look at me when I walked in, but I could feel her gaze on me, cold and calculating. The judge glanced up as we took our seats, her eyes flicking between Martin and Nain. The silence in the room was thick, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. Nain spoke first, her voice steady and practiced. "Your Honor, we're here today to discuss temporary support for my client, Mrs. Carver. She has no income, no assets, and no place to live. She sacrificed her career to raise her family, and now she's been left with nothing." I could hear the bullshit in her words, but I didn't react. I had heard it all before. I had seen the way Grace had manipulated the situation, the way she had played the victim. But it wasn't going to work this time. When it was Martin's turn, he stood up with a calm confidence. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Carver, is here to ensure that the division of assets is done fairly. While Mrs. Carver may claim she is without support, the truth is that she has made choices that have led to her current situation. Mr. Carver has worked for 30 years, and he has the documentation to prove that everything he has is legally his. I watched the judge closely as Martin spoke. She was flipping through the papers, reading the points we had made about Grace's affair with Alan, the text messages, and the way she had been planning this divorce for months. I could feel the shift in the room. I could sense that the judge wasn't buying Grace's story. Then it came, the question I had been waiting for. Mrs. Carver, the judge asked, her voice firm, were you planning this divorce while still living with your husband? Grace's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. No, Your Honor, she said, her voice cool but shaky. I had no choice. I couldn't stay in that marriage any longer. It was emotionally draining. Were you texting Mr. Allen about your divorce plans while still married? The judge interrupted. Grace went pale. For a split second, I saw her falter. She knew this was the end of the game. The judge didn't wait for Grace's answer. I have seen the messages, Mrs. Carver. Your plan was to use your husband's assets to fund a new life with Mr. Allen. You have no claim to temporary support. You are capable of supporting yourself. There was a pause, the weight of the judge's words hanging in the air. Grace's face turned red and she opened her mouth to speak, but the judge held up a hand, silencing her. I'm denying your motion for temporary support. The Justice Carver. The division of assets will proceed as outlined by Mr. Carver's attorney. The room seemed to hold its breath. Martin gave me a quick glance, a subtle nod, and I could feel the victory in the air. It wasn't over yet, but this was a significant blow to Grace's plans. I stood up as the judge wrapped up the session. The hearing is adjourned, she said, and with a swift motion, she gathered her papers, signaling the end. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't the end of the battle, but it was a damn good start. Grace had been exposed, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate the system. Outside the courthouse, Martin slapped me on the back. Well, that went better than expected. I gave him a small smile. Yeah, but it's not over yet. She'll come back swinging. I wouldn't worry about her, Martin said. She's been dealt a serious blow today. And now we have the upper hand. I nodded, but as I walked out into the bright sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I wasn't just surviving this anymore. I was fighting back. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel like I was winning. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew Grace wouldn't give up without a fight. But for now, I had won, and that felt damn good. The days after the court hearing passed quietly, but there was an undercurrent of tension that refused to settle. Grace didn't make any immediate moves to appeal the judge's decision, and I wasn't sure if that meant she was defeated or just biding her time. But either way, I was prepared. I'd finally learned how to play the game, and this time I wasn't going to let her win. I had my routine now. Coffee at 6, a jog around the neighborhood, and then back to the house, which still felt empty, even after all the time that had passed. The silence of it was overwhelming, but I had come to appreciate it. It was mine now. No more arguing over the thermostat, no more complaints about what I wanted to watch on TV. I was the only one here, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a victory. One afternoon, just as I was finishing up some paperwork, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My first thought was that it was some solicitor or maybe a neighbor, but when I opened the door, it was Tiffany standing there. She wasn't looking at me, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Dad," she said, her voice low, "can we talk?" I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. "What's going on, Tiffany?" She hesitated before entering, like she was unsure of what to expect from me now. We hadn't spoken much since the divorce papers were served. I knew she was struggling, caught in the middle of this mess I had never wanted her to be a part of. Once she was seated, I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said finally, her voice cracking a little. I shouldn't have clapped. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know it would hurt you like that." I felt a pang in my chest. This wasn't the daughter I had raised. Tiffany had always been the smart one, the one who would take care of things on her own, the one I thought could handle anything. But this, all of this, her involvement, her side with Grace, the way she had turned her back on me, it was too much for her to handle. She didn't know what she had been doing, and I knew that wasn't entirely her fault. I sighed, sitting down across from her. "Tiffany, you don't have to apologize. You were just caught in the middle of everything. I understand that. But you've got to realize that this situation isn't just between your mother and me. It's not just a game for either of us. It's real." "I know," she whispered, "but I wanted to believe her dad. I thought if I took her side, it would make things better. I didn't want to choose sides, but I guess I did. I know, kid, I said softly. I know. There was a long pause. The silence between us felt heavy, but it was the kind of silence that was necessary. There were things we needed to say to each other, but it was like we both needed time to find the words. Finally, Tiffany broke the silence. Mom's been different, she said. She's been talking to me about her plans, about moving on, about everything she wants to do now that she's free. She paused and then added, she wants me to move with her. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had expected something like this, but hearing it from Tiffany made it more real. And what do you want to do, Tiffany? She met my gaze then, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. I just want things to be normal again. Normal doesn't exist anymore. I said, my voice quiet but firm. What's happening right now is what it is. There's no going back to how things used to be. You have to decide where you want to go from here. Tiffany nodded, her eyes searching my face like she was trying to find something, some kind of reassurance. But I couldn't give that to her, not right now. I could only give her honesty. I'm not asking you to pick a side, kid, I said. But you need to stop thinking that everything is going to fix itself if you just ignore what's really going on. You're old enough to see it for what it is. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, the weight of my words sinking in. Finally, she stood up, her shoulders slumped with the burden of everything she was carrying. I need to go, she said softly. But I'll be back to talk more. I don't know what to do. I stood up with her, walking her to the door. Take your time, Tiffany. I'm here when you're ready. She gave me a small, tentative smile. Thanks, Dad. And with that, she was gone. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a mixture of emotions, sadness, anger, and something I couldn't quite identify. I had spent so many years focusing on the wrong things. Trying to fix everyone else's problems, trying to be the perfect husband, the perfect father. But none of it had ever really worked. Maybe now, I had a chance to focus on me. That night I sat alone in the living room, just thinking. Tiffany had a lot to process, and so did I. Grace, with all her plans and manipulations, was out of the picture for now. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to figure out who I really was without her. The phone rang again and I almost didn't pick it up. But I did. It was Neil. Hey, he said. How's it going? Better? Better than it was. Neil was quiet for a moment, then he chuckled. You're a tough guy, Rick. You always have been. I'm learning to be. I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. We talked for a little while longer, about the divorce, about life, and about what came next. But as we spoke, something shifted in me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to find my way again. And it was a hell of a lot better than being lost in the silence. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. The weeks that followed were quieter. Life began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Tiffany came by every other Saturday for dinner, and we didn't talk much about Grace anymore. It was like the silence between us had created its own language, one that didn't need words to convey what was understood. We both knew what had happened, and we both knew we had to move on. The house, still just as empty as it had been when Grace left, no longer felt like a battleground. It wasn't a place filled with the remnants of a broken marriage. It was a place that was mine again. I started making small changes, nothing drastic, just little things like rearranging the furniture, getting rid of the things that didn't belong to me anymore. Each change felt like taking back another piece of myself. I spent my weekends in the garage, working on the truck, something I hadn't done in years. I'd forgotten how much I loved it, the solitude, the satisfaction of fixing something with my own hands. There was something peaceful about the work, something that allowed me to focus on the present and forget the past. But then, one afternoon, while I was replacing the weather stripping on the front door, a car pulled up. I didn't recognize it at first. The engine cut off, and I wiped my hands on the rag before walking out to see who it was. Grace was standing by the driver's side, her arms folded across her chest. Paige was in the passenger seat, sitting stiffly, like she didn't want to be there. Grace looked like she had been crying, her face was pale, her eyes red. For a second I almost felt guilty. But then I remembered everything that happened, everything she had done. Rick, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I nodded, not sure what to say. She took a step toward me, but I didn't move. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what she had to say. We need to talk about your response, she said, her words rushed, as if she couldn't get them out fast enough. About what Martin filed, I raised an eyebrow. What about it? You attached my private messages, she said, almost defensively. I didn't agree to that, you had no right. I couldn't help but smile, that wasn't a happy smile. You didn't think I'd bring that up. You thought I'd just let you walk away with everything while you were planning this thing with Alan. Her face turned red and she opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. You made your choices, Grace. And I made mine. We're not having this conversation anymore. She looked taken aback for a moment, and then her expression shifted. Her jaw tightened as she tried to hold herself together. I lived in that house for 19 years. You think I don't deserve something for that? I shook my head, my voice steady. You deserve exactly what the law says you deserve, Grace. And right now, that's nothing because you weren't on the deed. You didn't contribute to the mortgage. I paid for everything, just like I always did. So don't try to make this about fairness. It's not. She blinked, like my words were hitting her in ways she hadn't expected. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, but then she just stood there, her shoulders slumped. Grace, I said, softer this time. This is over. I'm done with this. And you need to be too. Paige, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. Maybe we should go. She looked at Grace, her voice quiet but insistent. Grace didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the ground, the weight of everything finally settling in. Yeah, I said, my voice calm. Maybe you should. The two of them walked back to the car, and I didn't move. I stood there, watching them leave. When the car pulled away, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It was over. Not just the marriage, but everything. The lies, the manipulation, the guilt. It was all done. I went back inside and sat on the couch, staring at the empty room. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't fighting anymore. I wasn't trying to fix something that was never going to be fixed. That night, Tiffany came by, as she always did. She looked a little older now, a little more worn from everything that had happened. She didn't say much at first, just sat down at the kitchen table with me. How's Mom? I asked, not really expecting an answer. Tiffany hesitated. He's okay. I think she's trying to figure things out. But it's hard, Dad. I know it is, I said, my voice softening. But you don't have to fix it for her. She's the one who made those choices. Not you. I know, Tiffany replied. She paused before adding, I think I get it now. I didn't before, but I do now. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a real one. The next few months were quieter still. Grace didn't reach out again, and neither did her lawyer. I had no idea what had become of her and Alan, but I didn't care anymore. The chapter of my life that had been consumed by her was closed. Tiffany and I found a new rhythm. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We spent more time together, talked more openly, and started building something new. One Saturday, few weeks after the final settlement was reached, I stood by the front door of the house, looking out at the yard. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. It felt like the end of one thing and the beginning of another. The doorbell rang, and I turned to find Tiffany standing there, holding a small box. Got something for you, she said with a half smile. I raised an eyebrow. What's this? She shrugged, handing me the box. Just a little something. Thought you might like it. I opened it to find a small framed picture, just the two of us, from a summer long ago, before everything fell apart. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that time, how much I had taken for granted. Thanks, kid, I said, my voice thick. This is good, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was starting to get my life back on track.